So there's been some rumours over the last couple of days that EA have extended their license with F1 for 2 extra years. Now it turns out this was either false or just confirmed wrong, I'm not entirely sure. I have directly asked EA and they were basically able not really to comment on anything. They weren't able to say, yes, it's been extended, no it hasn't. They just weren't really able to say anything other than what they've said publicly, which is nothing. But should the license be extended? Should EA get a longer F1 license to make games? Well, there's 4 different angles to look at this from. The first one is EA's angle. Does EA want to extend this license? Well, it seems like the obvious answer is yes. Yes, okay, in recent times, the F1 game hasn't always been growing as much as they'd like, but F1 25 is definitely back on the right path. And honestly, I think they haven't really got a game if the license ends. Let's not forget, EA bought Codemasters just a couple of years ago for over $1 billion. And if Codemasters, EA, loses the F1 license, well, that will look like a pretty bad investment. So of course they want the F1 license to continue. I'm sure they'd like to change the terms, maybe pay less for it, yada, yada, yada. But honestly, I think they can't do what they did with FC 25 and just get rid of the license and carry on anyway, because there's too much licensed content. Obviously, you've got the driver likeness and the driver names and the team likeness and the team names, all these things. Okay, you could go unlicensed with that stuff, but the tracks? Do you really want to go unlicensed with the tracks? Or then you'd have to go to each track individually and get licenses like other racing games do? It's possible, but there's a reason that there's not really an unofficial F1 game out there. Would F1 want to continue the license? Because those are 2 sides that really matter. The rest is just noise and opinion, which we'll get to in a minute. On the face of it, I think the answer has to be yes, they do want to continue giving the license to EA, because although it's not always been the most universally liked game and it's not always grown in sales, who else are they going to give it to? You could give them someone like Assetto Corsa, maybe iRacing, maybe even 2K, who were looking to buy Codemasters. Maybe, but is the grass greener on the other side? We don't know. EA are a known entity. They know what they're getting out of EA Codemasters, and it's a pretty good, pretty representative F1 game where they have a reasonable amount of control over the licensing. The other part is EA is basically a marketing company. The amount they spend on marketing is outrageous. Would another company like iRacing or Assetto Corsa spend as much on marketing? It's a very simple answer. Absolutely not. This is a complete no-brainer. The only way they would consider switching is if relationships soured for EA, maybe EA were doing things they didn't like, or they were convinced that the grass was indeed green on the other side, or obviously if EA chose themselves not to continue. I personally cannot see F1 not wanting to continue with EA based on those reasons. But what about the noise then? What about the opinions? What about what we think? We'll get onto my opinion in just a moment, but I think in general, I think it's fair to say that EA isn't that popular. You know, I constantly get comments on my videos moaning about EA and EA killing games and how the game's the same every year, which, to be fair, probably carries over from Codemasters as well. In reality, we get a yearly decent F1 game. Now, look, it's not perfect, and I'm sure some people out there will actively hate it. Fine, I get it. But like F1 25 is a decent representation of F1 in general. F1 23 was as well. F1 2021, 2020 was. In general, we get a new game every single year with the new teams, the new drivers, the new tracks that largely represents F1. We get safety cars, we get virtual safety cars, etc., etc. Pit stops, wearing tyres. Do you know what I mean? We get a pretty representative example of F1. I think if it was to go to somebody else, people would initially be happy with that. But in reality, what we'd see is a few years without an F1 game at all. And then maybe you'd get a handling model that you would prefer. Or you'd get a career mode system that you'd prefer. You'd get some bits you'd prefer, but would the game be as well-rounded as EA's game is right now? Not initially. Codemasters themselves showed this back in 2015 when they started from scratch. They went to a new game engine, and the 2015 game was pretty bare bones. And bear in mind, this was a company that just 5 or 6 years later would sell for $1 billion. They were not a small company, Codemasters, and yet their first game had no career mode. So realistically, what you'd get is if they moved companies would be a couple of years of no game realistically. Then you'd get a game that's okay, maybe it's great in certain ways, but in general probably isn't nearly as good as the current F1 games. You wouldn't have red flags, you may not have a career mode, online might be really limited. It would just be limited because they have to sell some games to make some money, so they have to release it in a form that's not the perfect final form. And then maybe a few years down the line, maybe we'd end up with a better game. Maybe. And okay, that shouldn't stop you. Just a few bad years shouldn't stop you. But EA, despite their negative press, don't make a bad F1 game. Yes, you may prefer it to go a different way, but what I would personally like, my opinion, the fourth angle here, I would actually choose for it to stay with EA right now. But what I'd actually choose is for the license to no longer be exclusive. The license hasn't always been exclusive. Back in the early 2000s, we had multiple different companies making an official F1 game. The trend these days is towards exclusivity. Just look at, Netflix and things, Disney Plus. People only put their copyrighted media on one platform. The music industry is an exception to this and gets it right. Imagine if you could only get Taylor Swift songs on Spotify and you could only get Foo Fighters songs on Apple Music, and you wanted to listen to both. You have to subscribe to both. That would be insane for the music industry. It somehow works for the TV and movie industry. And in my opinion, we don't need exclusivity for the F1 license. Why not give 2K a license as well? Why not give iRacing a license as well? And the Assetto Corsa guys a license as well? Okay, you can't give everyone a license because they would need to pay X money. I get it. Like you don't want 10 F1 games. That's just confusing. I think we could definitely have 2, maybe even 3. Maybe even alternate it like Call of Duty used to do, where you get one company making one year and another company making it the other year. That would stop people moaning that it's the same game every year, because it objectively would be a very different game every year. And maybe you much prefer one game over the other, one game developer over the other. So then buy it every 2 years. I think you'd also have to allow each company in that case to release a DLC that's just the teams and driver update, but nothing else. So they could develop it for a year, and then for a year they had to freeze development other than releasing one DLC of that season's teams and drivers. So if you did prefer a certain developer's games, you could then just play that one game for 2 years, but then still always have the latest teams and drivers. But overall, excluding that possibility, because F1, just look at their calendar, don't seem too keen to rotate or not have exclusive agreements, I think EA do a good job, honestly. And look, before you say it, no, I haven't been paid by EA. EA not paid me a single penny about F1 25. They did pay me a little bit to do a couple of social media posts last year, but that was obviously hashtag ad stuff, just like, hey, look, F1's available now type stuff. They've never paid me for an opinion. They've never paid me to make a video. They've never paid me for anything. This is not remotely sponsored. But I think EA do a good job. I do. F1 25 is decent. F1 24 was worrying, and if they continue down that path, I'll be more worried. F1 25 is a decent representation of an F1 game. We get a new F1 game every year. We get decent investment into it. It's not perfect, but it's decent. The rumours are that the license ends at the end of this year, end of 2025, and that they've got an option to extend. That is the rumours. Obviously, we've had other rumours this week that it has been extended or it hasn't been extended. We don't know, but they've clearly got an option to extend. I'll be surprised if that option is not taken up based on what I've said here today. We'll see, because I believe it's just one option to extend. I could be wrong on that. So they'll have to renegotiate it from 2 years' time. Maybe at that point, they go, all right, it's non-exclusive. Alex Gillon was right. I doubt it. They don't listen to me. But anyway, guys, let me know what you think of all this down in the comments. Just keep it civil. Keep it, have your opinion, but make sure you keep it to facts. Keep it to what you think rather than pointless insults and, unfounded things. But yeah, drop us up as well if you haven't already. I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.